I think we should get started. Today, do we have enough people here to hold it over?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we have a quorum.
Okay, yeah. We have two items on our agenda: Kash Patel's nomination to serve as Director of FBI, and S331, the Fentanyl Act. Because the Halt Fentanyl Act is listed on the agenda for the first time, it'll be held over until our next meeting. Last week, committee Democrats exercised their right under the committee rules to hold Patel's nomination for 7 days. Obviously, we had to honor that hold from last week, so today is the day that we vote on this nominee. Now, we all know that Mr. Patel, like other nominees, undergo rigorous vetting. He's no exception. Before his hearing, he produced more than 1,000 pages of records, disclosed over 1,000 interviews. He underwent an FBI background investigation, produced a financial disclosure, and worked with ethics officials to identify and resolve potential conflicts of interest. At his hearing, he answered questions for more than 5 hours and provided 147 pages of responses to written questions. So, we've examined every detail of his life, and he's been subjected to relentless attacks on his character during this whole period of time. Now, what we've learned from this committee process is what we knew from his resume. Mr. Patel has spent his whole career fighting for righteous causes. He's been a public defender representing the accused against the power of the state. He's been a congressional staffer investigating the partisan weaponization of our legal system. And he served in key national security roles, protecting Americans from foreign enemies. He's received support from former FBI agents, former federal and state prosecutors, and organizations representing more than 680,000 law enforcement officers. But Mr. Patel's resume, his accomplishments, and his supports aren't why he's the best person for this job. Mr. Patel should be considered our next FBI director because the FBI has been infected by political bias and weaponized against the American people. Mr. Patel knows it. Mr. Patel exposed it, and Mr. Patel has targeted for it, and I've got plenty of examples to show what's wrong with the FBI. Mr. Patel was instrumental in exposing Crossfire Hurricane. He showed during that investigation that the Democratic National Committee funded false allegations against President Trump, that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation hid information from the FISA court to wiretap a presidential campaign, and that an FBI lawyer lied in the process. As reward for his efforts to uncover this truth, he was attacked by the media, and the Department of Justice secretly subpoenaed his records. Now, I and my staff know a thing or two about this kind of retaliation because my staff received similar treatment during our investigation. Sadly, as I've said at Mr. Patel's hearing, Crossfire Hurricane is but one example of recent FBI misconduct. The FBI targeted traditional Catholic families and concerns of parents for political reasons. The FBI coordinated with social media platforms to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. The FBI conducted an unprecedented raid on President Trump's home in an act of partisan lawfare. In just the last few days, we've heard unconfirmed reports that someone at the FBI may have illegally leaked information about upcoming ICE raids, putting the lives of ICE agents at risk. If true, the betrayal can't be overstated. The FBI has fallen into really old habits and is long overdue for massive reform. Mr. Patel is the man to do it, and that's why he's being attacked so viciously right now. Before we even had a hearing, committee members called Mr. Patel by these adjectives: dishonest, untrustworthy, lacking in character, a wolf at the door, a conspiracy theorist, a staunch political loyalist, and lastly, a nightmare. Since his nomination was announced, committee Democrats have sent at least 11 letters to 11 different agencies and parties demanding records and urging investigation into Mr. Patel. Each letter breathlessly accuses Mr. Patel of something new, often citing quote unquote highly credible anonymous sources that don't fit the facts. Some accused him of not following hostage rescue protocol. Others suggested he is secretly directing FBI personnel decisions. And some accused him of promoting conspiracy theories. The purpose of this campaign is quite obvious: throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. I'm not falling for it, and I don't believe the American people will likewise. These attacks are unfair, this harassment unwarranted. They show that Mr. Patel won't receive fair consideration from the opposition, and they're directed at a nominee who served his country during both Democratic and Republican administrations. I expect we'll hear more unfair attacks and character smears today, but I'd like to point out a few egregious ones that we've already heard. One of my colleagues suggested that Mr. Patel called the police officers that protected the Capitol on January 6 cowards in uniform, end of quote, or quote unquote. Now, this is completely false. Anyone can listen to this same interview that he gave to hear what he actually said. He said senior Pentagon leadership who failed to mobilize the National Guard were, quote unquote, cowards in uniform. His comments had absolutely nothing to do with the people in blue. Mr. Patel has also been accused of mismanaging hostage rescue missions, particularly one in Africa. But numerous national security officials, including General Tata, who was directly involved, have said it is, quote unquote, irresponsible to say Mr. Patel jeopardized the mission and that Mr. Patel, quote, played a large role in the success of the mission, unquote. Mr. Patel has also been accused of having an enemies list. Mr. Patel does not call his book appendix an enemies list, and he said that it is not about political revenge. He believes, as I believe, that those who have abused their positions in government should be called out for breaking the public trust. It's very clear that my Democrat colleagues made their minds up about Mr. Patel long before he was given an opportunity to be heard. And now my colleagues attack Mr. Patel and demand that he come back before this committee to answer for reforms and personnel changes that the Trump administration has begun at the FBI. Of course, it's outrageous, as we all know, to suggest that a nominee should come before the Senate to answer questions for an agency's action that occurred before he gets to be head of that agency. But more importantly, FBI reforms, and yes, even firings, are needed. The Trump administration is cleaning house at the FBI because the FBI is and has been for years infected with political bias and whistleblower retaliation, and I've got a lot to say about that in just a minute. It's long past overdue for the whistleblowers who's been affected by FBI misconduct to be given a voice. So now I'm going to take some time sharing statements from whistleblowers who were retaliated against some of the FBI officials that Trump has recently fired. Now, I'd like to have the White House and my Republican colleagues take note of this, because I think some of these people should be reinstated because of how justly they've been treated. And like you've heard me so many times say, whistleblowers are treated like a skunk at a picnic. And I hope my Democrat colleagues will learn a lesson about how the FBI has previously treated whistleblowers, both under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations, so that we don't have this happening again. One whistleblower said, quote, "People like these have harmed the noble mission of the Bureau. They've created turmoil, and their personal agenda has spread throughout the Bureau over the last decade. In service of the country, we should insist on removing them from the FBI, not tomorrow, but right now," end of quote. Remember, he said the last decade. That covers presidents of both parties. A second whistleblower said, quote, "Michael Nordwall had oversight and approval authority over Arctic frost, which required a critical assessment of alleged basis for opening an investigation of this magnitude and political significance. The failure to raise an objection must less critically assess Thibault's motives alone should be grounds for dismissal," end of quote. And for my Democrat colleagues, you've heard me talk about Thibault for the last 2 years. One of the few people that I ever know that Ray fired for doing things wrong. And I had to point that out to him. Now pay attention to this one. A third FBI whistleblower said, quote, "On January 6, 2021, I took leave and went to see the president speak on the ellipse. Later, my wife and I were among a crowd southwest of the Capitol. Even though we were involved in no violence, never set foot on the steps of the leading to the Capitol building, and never entered it, I self-reported my presence to the FBI after seeing violence in the news reports. The FBI did nothing at first, but more than a year later, suspended my security clearance. Under supervision of Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, investigators questioned my coworkers about whether I ever vocalized support for President Trump or objections to COVID-19 vaccine. I was forced to take early retirement to pay bills and have essentially been sidelined from employment opportunities due to the FBI abuse of the clearance system to target me for my political beliefs, end of quote. Now you're going to hear these names, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, crop up here quite often. So I don't know who they are, but they're obviously not very good people to have in the FBI when they take retaliation as they have. A fourth FBI whistleblower and a registered Democrat said, quote, as a security division employee, I witnessed abuses committed against multiple employees by FBI senior leaders, particularly by Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins. I also saw a security division retaliated against 5 of its own employees for protesting these unlawful practices. Because I spoke out against these abuses, Perkins and Timothy Dunnan suspended my security clearance, costing me my job and continuing employment, totaling approximately $700,000 in lost wages and retirement benefits, end of quote. A fifth whistleblower said, quote, although some of my FBI leaders who abused the clearance process, like Dina Perkins and Jeff Veltri, have already left, they weren't alone. Timothy Dunham approved Perkins' wrongdoings and engaged in his own. While most security division employees are fantastic, some FBI leaders still remain within the security and integrity and investigation section who will continue this abuse of the process. From FBI whistleblower Marcus Allen, quote, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins caused the suspension of my security clearance because I questioned whether the FBI director was truthful to Congress and whether the FBI was obeying the laws and constitutions in the January 6, 2021 investigations. Their actions left me without pay for 2 years, while other FBI officials prevented me from having other income. Although the FBI ultimately reinstated my clearance and settled my lawsuit, my career at the FBI was over, and the financial and emotional damage to me and my family will never be completely restored. Why should you have to hire a lawyer and sue just because you use your constitutional right of free speech? Another FBI whistleblower said, quote, after I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relatively. I'm going to start this quote over. After I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relative communication of Jeff Veltri, who ordered the opening of the case. Dina Perkins and FBI attorney Tasha Gibbs. Allen was entitled to those communications, which were evidence that his clearance suspension was retaliatory. Shortly after I completed the vast majority of work on the communication recommending Allen's reinstatement, the Allen case was reassigned to another adjudicator, and I was transferred to a different unit apparently in reprisal for reporting the wrongdoing in the Allen suspension. I soon resigned from the FBI to avoid further retaliation. I believe that Veltri, Perkins, and Gibbs were responsible for retaliating against Allen, and that Giuliani, Arzini, Perkins, and Gibbs were likely responsible for retaliation against me, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Garrett O'Boyle, quote, I faced retaliation from junior, mid, and senior level, unquote, leaders in the FBI. More than 29 months later, I'm still indefinitely suspended without pay and benefits. Other whistleblowers have since confirmed that the FBI intentionally stranded me in the middle of a move and withheld our possessions to maximize the pain of my suspension. A new era of accountability and true whistleblower protection to the FBI is long overdue. FBI officials like Sean Clark, Sean Fitzgerald, Jeff Berkebile, Dina Perkins, Jeff Veltri, Jennifer Moore, Michael Snyders, Timothy Dunham, and other leadership up to Christopher Wray are responsible for what happened to me and my family, ensuring they no longer work at the FBI isn't retribution, it's responsible leadership. From FBI whistleblower Steve Friend, Jacqueline McGuire was promoted to upper echelons of the FBI after sending federal agents to arrest nonviolent Catholic pro-life protester Mark Houck at gunpoint. As someone who lost my career by blowing the whistle on these kinds of abuses and needlessly risky tactics for cooperative subjects, I was offended by her being rewarded rather than held accountable. Her dismissal is a small step towards ending the FBI's weaponization and should come sooner, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Mike Zoomer, quote, after witnessing federal prosecutors favor a sexual predator district attorney who used the power of his office to sexually abuse vulnerable women, I reported their wrongdoing to the presiding federal judge. Although the allegations weren't classified, the FBI suspended and later revoked my security clearance. The U.S. attorney responsible for the misconduct was named by President Biden to lead the Department of Justice criminal investigation, and the FBI special agent in charge responsible for the FBI's retaliation against me was promoted to be the third highest FBI official. He soon retired after he harassed a young female subordinate. Meanwhile, I went through an 8-year process to be reinstated, only to have the Biden DOJ affirm the FBI's revocation of my security clearance in December 2024, finalizing my removal. See how removing a security clearance is a tool to retaliate and ruin people professionally. And lastly, I know you're tired of listening to this, so that's why I said, and lastly, from another FBI whistleblower, quote, I've watched the FBI become an institution not, quote unquote, of the people, but of a select few who know the, quote unquote, system and process and use it to their advantage. Those people need to leave. As a whistleblower, I stand ready to help return the FBI to its earlier days of glory and return America's trust in what was an incredible institution, end of quote. Now, how can anybody listen to these statements from the FBI to know that there's a culture that just is not totally in tune with what law enforcement agency ought to do and conclude that everything is okay? These law enforcement agencies are out of control, drunk on power, and blinded by political infection. It's time to force them to recognize they answer to Congress and we the people. And those who retaliated against whistleblowers should be fired full stop by colleagues who think otherwise of protecting these whistleblowers. And I hope this message gets to President Trump. My Democratic colleagues hounded Patel to say he'd stand up to Trump. Well, these brave whistleblowers stood up to the last administration and they suffered retaliation. So why aren't my Democrat colleagues running to defend them and demanding the wrongdoers be held accountable? This administration must hold the bad actors accountable, fire them if necessary, give whistleblowers their security clearance back. President Trump, I hope you hear that. Put them in a position they were in before they had their retaliation. President Trump, I hope you hear that. If you can hire people, you can reinstate people, President Trump. That's part of what this committee ought to be focused on. Solutions to the rampant weaponization and whistleblower retaliation. These are two issues that Kash Patel is perfectly suited to fix because he's lived those issues. Senator Durbin.